My name is Officer Daniel Tsosie, and I have served as a Navajo Nation tribal police officer for 14 years now. Before that, I spent 3 years with the Apache County Sheriff's Office and another 2 years working security for the Navajo Nation Parks and Recreation Department. I've responded to domestic disturbances in remote chapters where the nearest backup is an hour away. I've worked missing persons cases in terrain so rugged that search dogs refuse to enter certain areas. I've investigated livestock mutilations that left ranchers too terrified to return to their own land. And I've dealt with situations that would make most officers from outside the reservation question whether they'd made the right career choice. I tell you this so you understand that I'm not someone who scares easily or who takes supernatural claims at face value without evidence. I was raised traditional, yes, learned the stories and the songs from my grandfather, but I also went to college, got trained in modern law enforcement, learned to think like an investigator who deals in facts and documentation. Or at least I did, until June 13th, 2024. Before I tell you what happened in the place we call Ts'íí'áhí, Devil's Canyon, before I explain why I can no longer patrol certain sections of the Chusca Mountains after dark, and why I keep corn pollen and turquoise in my patrol vehicle for reasons that would violate every departmental regulation if anyone looked too closely, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this video, if you follow these stories from tribal officers and law enforcement who work in places where the old ways still hold power, please subscribe and like this video. What I'm about to share goes against the advice of elders who say some knowledge shouldn't be spoken aloud. But after what I witnessed, after what I became, staying silent feels like abandoning others to walk into danger without warning. And I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? Have you ever been to the Navajo Nation? To that vast landscape where red rock mesas rise from desert floors and the wind carries voices in languages older than any written history? Have you ever felt the land watching you, measuring whether you belong there, deciding whether to let you pass safely? Drop a comment below. Tell me if you felt it. Tell me if you've heard them singing. The Navajo Nation covers over 27,000 square miles across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, making it the largest Native American territory in the United States. Most people who visit see the dramatic landscapes, the Monument Valley formations that appear in countless photographs and movies, the painted desert vistas that draw tourists from around the world. But there are places on the reservation that tourists never see, places that don't appear on any maps distributed to visitors, areas where even Diné people who grew up here will tell you not to go without proper preparation and knowledge. Devil's Canyon is one of those places. It's located in the Chusca Mountains on the Arizona-New Mexico border, a region of high desert terrain that rises to over 9,000 feet elevation in places, covered in ponderosa pine and aspen at the higher elevations, dropping down into deep canyons carved by seasonal runoff, where juniper and pinon grow twisted and ancient. The canyon itself is maybe 8 miles long, and between 500 and 800 feet deep at various points, with walls of red sandstone that have been carved by wind and water into formations that traditional people say contain faces that show the spirits who live there. The Diné name, Ts'íí'áhí, doesn't actually mean Devil's Canyon. That's a mistranslation, or maybe a deliberate obscuring by early missionaries and government officials who didn't want to acknowledge what the name really means. Ts'íí'áhí translates more accurately to where the old ones gather, or the place of ancient meeting. My grandfather, who lived to be 97 years old and who practiced as a hatali, a traditional medicine man, for over 60 years, told me stories about Ts'íí'áhí from the time I was old enough to understand. He said it was a place where the boundaries between worlds were thin, where beings from the time before the current world age still walked, where the Anasazi, the ancient ones who built the cliff dwellings and then vanished, had performed ceremonies that changed the nature of the land itself. He said there were protocols for entering the canyon, songs that had to be sung, offerings that had to be made, times of day and times of year when entering was absolutely forbidden. He told me that people who went into Ts'íí'áhí without proper knowledge and preparation either came out changed or didn't come out at all. And he told me, specifically, directly, looking me in the eyes when I was 16 years old and had just gotten my driver's license and was feeling invincible the way teenage boys do, that I should never, ever enter that canyon alone, especially not after the sun had touched the western rim. I remembered his warnings. Of course I did. But 14 years of police work, 14 years of responding to calls and investigating crimes and dealing with real, concrete, documented problems had made me practical, had made me think that while the old stories contained wisdom and cultural knowledge, they were also metaphorical, symbolic, ways of encoding practical warnings in spiritual language. Don't go into remote canyons alone because you could get hurt and no one would find you. Don't enter certain areas at night because the terrain is dangerous and you can't see hazards. Don't disturb archaeological sites because they're protected by law, and disturbing them is both illegal and disrespectful. That's how I'd learned to think. That's the framework I used to understand the world. And that framework worked perfectly well until June 13th, 2024, when I got a call that made everything change. I came on duty at 1400 hours for an afternoon shift that would run until midnight. It was a Thursday, temperature in the mid-90s, typical early summer weather for the high desert. I spent the first few hours handling routine calls, a welfare check on an elderly woman in Ts'íí'áhí who hadn't been seen by her neighbors in a few days, but who turned out to be fine. Just visiting family in Chinle. A report of suspicious activity near the chapter house that turned out to be teenagers skateboarding. A livestock loose call where I helped a rancher round up 3 horses that had gotten through a broken fence. Normal reservation police work. Then at 1847 hours, dispatch called me with something different. They'd received a call from a satellite phone, the caller identifying himself as Dr. Marcus Webb, an archaeologist from the University of Arizona who had permits to survey archaeological sites in the Ts'íí'áhí Mountains. He reported that one of his graduate students, a woman named Jennifer Chen, had gone into Ts'íí'áhí yesterday afternoon to photograph rock art and hadn't returned to their base camp. They'd waited through the night thinking she might have decided to camp in the canyon. But when she still hadn't appeared by mid-afternoon today, they'd started to worry. He wanted to know if tribal police could assist with a search. I acknowledged the call and headed toward the Chuskas. The location Dr. Webb had given for their base camp was about 40 miles from where I was. Most of it on decent roads, but the last 8 miles on rough Forest Service roads that required 4-wheel drive and careful navigation. As I drove, I called dispatch back and asked them to pull any information they had on archaeological permits for the Ts'íí'áhí area. They confirmed that Dr. Webb's team had valid permits from the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department, but they also noted something interesting. The permits specifically excluded Ts'íí'áhí from the survey area. The canyon was listed as off-limits due to cultural sensitivity and safety concerns. That meant that if Jennifer Chen had entered the canyon, she'd done so in violation of the permit terms, which complicated things legally, but more importantly suggested that she might not have been briefed on why the canyon was restricted. I arrived at the base camp at 1932 hours, just as the sun was starting to drop toward the western horizon, painting the red rock formations in deeper shades of orange and crimson. The camp consisted of 3 tents, a cooking area with a portable stove, and a folding table covered in maps and notebooks. There were 4 people there. Dr. Webb, a man in his late 50s with sun-weathered skin and wire-rimmed glasses. 2 graduate students, a young man named Tyler and a young woman named Mika, and a Navajo cultural monitor named Thomas Begay, who I recognized from previous interactions, a good man in his 60s who took his responsibilities seriously. Dr. Webb explained the situation. Jennifer was a second-year graduate student, experienced, with field work, careful and professional. She'd left camp yesterday at approximately 1500 hours, saying she wanted to photograph a rock art panel that she'd spotted through binoculars on the north wall of Ts'íí'áhí, maybe 2 miles into the canyon. She'd taken her camera equipment, water, a radio, and her cell phone. She'd said she'd be back before dark. When she hadn't returned by 2100 hours, they'd tried calling her cell phone but got no signal, which wasn't surprising given the canyon's depth and the lack of cell towers in this remote area. They'd tried her radio, but got only static. At dawn this morning, Tyler had hiked to the canyon rim and tried to spot her, but the canyon was deep and shadowed, and he couldn't see anything. That's when they decided to call for help. Thomas Begay pulled me aside while Dr. Webb was explaining all this to dispatch via the satellite phone. "You know about that canyon," he said quietly in Navajo. "You know what your grandfather would say about going in there?" I nodded. "I know. But I also know we have a missing person who's been gone over 24 hours in rough terrain. I have to search." He studied my face for a long moment. "Your grandfather taught you the songs?" "Some of them." "The protection prayers? The songs for crossing thresholds?" "Yes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Take this. Corn pollen. From a ceremony last month. If you go in there, if you have to enter after the sun touches the rim, you make an offering. You sing the songs. You treat the place with respect. And if you see something that doesn't make sense, something that violates what you know is possible, you don't investigate. You leave. A missing person is a tragedy, but some places take what they take, and trying to retrieve them only gives the place more." I took the pouch. I told him I understood, but I'm not sure I really did understand. Not then. Not with the practical investigator part of my brain still running the show, still thinking in terms of searchable terrain and potential injuries and evidence-based decision-making. I gathered my gear, a full search and rescue pack with rope, first aid supplies, water, energy bars, a headlamp, a radio, and flares. I had my service weapon, a Glock 22, though I wasn't sure what good it would do if Jennifer had been injured by a fall or trapped by rockfall. I told Dr. Webb and his team to stay at camp, to maintain radio contact, to call for additional search and rescue resources if I wasn't back by 2200 hours. Thomas walked with me to the canyon rim. The sun was touching the western edge now, maybe 20 minutes from dropping below the horizon completely. The canyon below us was already filling with shadow. The eastern wall still lit with orange light, but the canyon floor dark, mysterious, ancient. "Last chance to wait for morning," Thomas said. "By morning, she'll have been out there 30 hours. If she's injured, if she's trapped somewhere, every hour matters." He nodded slowly. "Then remember the songs. Remember what you are. Not just a police officer, a Diné man, someone who carries the old knowledge. That knowledge exists for a reason." I started down into Ts'íí'áhí, just as the sun disappeared below the rim. The descent was steep, following a narrow trail that switched back down the canyon wall. Loose rocks and exposed roots making footing treacherous. As I descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, maybe 15 degrees between the rim and the canyon floor, and the quality of the light changed, became bluer, colder, less natural. I called out for Jennifer every few minutes, my voice echoing off the sandstone walls, sounding strange and distorted by the acoustics of the canyon. No response. I reached the canyon floor at 2018 hours, just as full darkness settled in. I turned on my headlamp and immediately noticed something wrong. My radio, which had been working perfectly on the rim, was producing interference. Not normal static, but a sound like singing, like voices harmonizing in traditional Navajo style, but singing words I couldn't quite make out. Singing in patterns that seemed to shift and change, never resolving into anything I could understand or recognize. I tried calling dispatch, got nothing but that singing. I tried calling Thomas on the rim. Same thing. I checked my cell phone. No signal, expected. But the phone itself was behaving strangely. The screen flickering, the time display jumping between different hours, showing 2018, then 2347, then 1432, cycling through times without pattern or logic. I looked at my watch, a traditional analog watch my grandfather had given me. The second hand was moving, but irregularly, advancing 3 seconds, stopping for 5 seconds, jumping backward 2 seconds, moving forward 7 seconds. Time was behaving wrong. I moved deeper into the canyon, following the north wall where Jennifer had supposedly been heading to photograph rock art. The walls rose 600 feet or more on either side of me, and in the darkness, they seemed to lean inward, seemed to be closing in, though when I shone my headlamp up at them, they were vertical, static, exactly as geology would predict. But the feeling persisted, the feeling of being enclosed, of being swallowed, of having entered something that was more than just a geological formation. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, I found the rock art panel. It was extensive, covering maybe 40 feet of wall space, featuring human figures and animal figures and geometric designs that were clearly very old, the patina on the petroglyphs suggesting they'd been carved hundreds or possibly thousands of years ago. And there was something else, Jennifer's camera. It was sitting on a rock at the base of the wall, carefully positioned, the lens cap still on, looking like she'd set it down intentionally rather than dropped it. I picked it up and turned it on. The display lit up and began cycling through the images she'd taken. Dozens of photographs of the rock art, detailed shots of individual petroglyphs, wide shots of the entire panel, and then something else. Photographs of the canyon floor, showing things that shouldn't be there. Structures. Not ancient ruins, but something else. Geometric shapes made of light. glowing lines that connected points in space, forming patterns that looked like architectural blueprints or mathematical diagrams rendered in 3 dimensions. I clicked through more images. The structures became more visible, more substantial, until in the last few photographs they appeared almost solid, looking like buildings or monuments made of something that glowed with soft amber light, occupying the same space as the canyon floor, but existing at a different frequency, a different level of reality. I heard singing, not from my radio, but from the canyon itself, voices harmonizing in patterns that were beautiful and terrible simultaneously, singing in Navajo and in older languages. Languages that might have been Anasazi or might have been something older still, singing words about the time before this world, about the places where the old ones went when they left this reality, about the doorways that remained open for those who knew how to see them. I looked up from the camera and I saw them, the structures. What Jennifer had photographed was visible to me now, not through the camera lens, but with my own eyes, occupying the canyon floor, like a city or a temple complex, geometric formations made of glowing amber light, connected by pathways that pulsed in rhythm with the singing. And there were figures, not solid, but translucent, appearing and disappearing, moving through the structures in patterns that suggested purpose, ritual, eternal repetition of ancient ceremonies. They were tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with proportions that were almost human, but elongated, stylized, like the figures in the petroglyphs brought to 3-dimensional life. They wore something that might have been clothing or might have been part of their bodies, geometric patterns that shifted and reconfigured, designs that hurt to look at directly because they contained angles and relationships that violated normal geometry. And they were singing. The voices I'd been hearing were coming from them, harmonizing in patterns that described the structures around them, that seemed to be maintaining the structures through sound, keeping them stable and present through constant recitation of their fundamental properties. I should have left then. I should have remembered Thomas's warning, should have remembered my grandfather's stories, should have backed away slowly and climbed out of that canyon and called for help from people who understood what they were dealing with. But I saw Jennifer. She was standing in the center of the largest structure, maybe 100 yards from where I stood, her back to me, facing towards something I couldn't quite see, something that existed at the heart of the geometrics complex. I called her name. She didn't respond. I moved closer, walking carefully, trying not to disturb anything, trying to move respectfully through this place that I now understood was not just a canyon, but a threshold, a boundary, a place where worlds intersected. As I got closer, I could see that Jennifer wasn't quite solid anymore. She was translucent, like the figures, flickering slightly, existing partially in this reality and partially in whatever reality the structures occupied. And she was singing. Her voice had joined the chorus, had become part of the harmonic pattern that maintained the Amber City, though I could tell she wasn't doing it voluntarily, wasn't choosing to sing, but was being sung through, was being used as a resonance chamber for something vast and ancient that needed human voices to maintain its presence in this world. I reached the edge of the structure she stood within. Up close, I could see that it wasn't made of any material I recognized. It was made of light, yes, but light that had properties beyond just electromagnetic radiation. Light that had texture and temperature and weight. Light that existed in more than 3 dimensions, and that folded and unfolded in ways that made my eyes hurt and my brain struggled to process what it was seeing. One of the tall figures moved closer, gliding across the ground without walking, and I heard a voice in my mind, not through my ears, but directly in my consciousness, speaking in Navajo, but ancient Navajo, the language as it might have been spoken centuries before European contact, using words and constructions I barely understood, but that carried meaning anyway, that bypassed linguistic understanding and went straight to some deeper level of comprehension. "You are Diné," the voice said, "born of the four sacred mountains, raised between earth and sky, taught the songs of your people. We are the old ones, the Anasazi, you call us, though that is not what we called ourselves. We built in stone, and then we built in light. We learned to construct in more than 3 dimensions, to create architecture that exists in multiple realities simultaneously, to maintain our works through harmonic resonance, through singing the mathematical relationships that describe existence itself. This place, Ts'íí'áhí, is one of our great works, a temple, a library, a beacon, a place where knowledge is stored not in symbols on stone, but in the fundamental patterns of reality, accessible to those who learn to perceive beyond the physical. Your people knew about us. Your ancestors knew we hadn't vanished, but had transcended, had learned to exist in forms that normal perception cannot detect. They made agreements with us. They would honor our works, would maintain the protocols for entering our temples, would teach their children the songs that allowed safe passage through the places where our reality overlapped yours. But those protocols have been forgotten by many. This woman entered without preparation, without songs, without understanding. And when she perceived our works, when her consciousness expanded to include our frequencies, she became trapped between worlds, unable to return to simple linear existence because she'd experienced multiplicity. We do not wish to keep her. We are not malevolent. But we cannot simply release her without causing damage to her consciousness. She has seen too much. She has become too entangled with our frequencies. She needs an anchor, someone who can stand partially in both worlds, who can sing the songs that will guide her back to linear time and 3-dimensional space while maintaining enough connection to our reality to prevent the transition from destroying her mind. I understood what they were asking. They wanted me to become a bridge, to open myself to their frequencies, to allow myself to perceive and exist in multiple realities simultaneously, to use that expanded consciousness to guide Jennifer back to normal existence while maintaining enough coherence to avoid becoming lost myself. It would change me permanently. It would mark me. It would make me into someone who existed partially in their world forever, who could never fully return to simple, solid, linear existence. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about all the stories he'd told me, all the warnings he'd given me, all the protocols he'd taught me. And I realized that those protocols weren't superstition. They weren't metaphor. They were practical instructions for navigating a reality that was vastly more complex than the 3-dimensional, single timeline world that most people perceived. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pouch of corn pollen Thomas had given me. I opened it and took a pinch, held it up toward the 4 directions, sang a protection song my grandfather had taught me, a song about walking in beauty, about maintaining harmony between earth and sky, about being strong and flexible and clear-minded. Then I said yes, just that word. But it was enough. One of the tall figures moved beside me, and I felt something change in my perception, like a frequency being activated in my cells, like a door opening in my consciousness that had always been there, but had been closed. Suddenly, I could see more. The structures weren't just geometric formations, but living architecture, conscious and aware, maintaining themselves through eternal self-description, singing themselves into existence moment by moment. The figures weren't beings in the normal sense, but patterns, mathematical relationships given form, consciousness expressed as geometry and light. And Jennifer wasn't trapped, but distributed. Her consciousness spread across multiple timelines and multiple realities, existing in all the moments she'd ever lived and all the moments she might live. Everything happening simultaneously with no distinction between past and present and future. I reached out to her, not physically, but with that expanded perception, with the part of me that could now perceive across dimensions and timelines. I sang the songs my grandfather had taught me, but I understood them differently now. Understood that they were more than poetry or prayer. They were instructions, roadmaps, descriptions of how to navigate multidimensional reality without losing coherence, without fragmenting across all the possible versions of yourself. I sang about the path that leads from the fourth world to this fifth world, about maintaining harmony and balance, about being centered and whole even when existence itself becomes fluid and negotiable. And Jennifer responded. I could feel her consciousness gathering, collecting itself from across the timelines where it had become distributed, following the songs back to a single coherent point in space and time. It took hours, or maybe minutes, or maybe no time at all, because time had stopped meaning what I thought it meant. But eventually, she was standing beside me, solid again, fully present in three-dimensional space and linear time. Her eyes clear, though terribly, terribly changed by what she'd experienced. I guided her back through the amber structures, back to the regular canyon floor, where geology and physics operated normally, back toward the trail that would take us to the rim. The structures faded as we moved away from the center of the canyon, becoming less visible, less substantial, though I knew I would always be able to perceive them now, would always be aware of that layer of reality overlaying the physical world. My radio started working again at some point during the climb out. I called Thomas and told him we were coming up. I could hear the relief in his voice and something else, recognition, understanding that something had changed, that I was different now than when I'd descended. We reached the rim at Orwom 47 hours, though my watch insisted it was still 20:43 hours, and Jennifer's watch showed 15:23 hours, and our phones displayed different times still. Thomas looked at both of us for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You sang the songs, he said. It wasn't a question. I sang them. And now you see. Yes, now I see. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in Shiprock for evaluation. Physically, she was fine, dehydrated but uninjured. Psychologically, she was changed in ways that the doctors couldn't quite categorize. She could remember entering the canyon, could remember photographing the rock art, could remember suddenly perceiving the structures and the figures. But after that, her memories became confused, non-linear, describing events that seemed to have happened simultaneously across multiple versions of the canyon, multiple versions of herself. The university decided she needed time off, recommended counseling, eventually accepted her decision to leave the graduate program and return home to California. I don't know if she still sees the structures. I don't know if what happened to her was permanent or if the effect faded over time. I hope it faded. For me, it didn't fade. It got clearer. I spent weeks after that incident researching everything I could find about the Anasazi, about their ruins, and their astronomical knowledge, and the theories about why they vanished from the Four Corners region around 1300 CE. I found archaeological reports describing the sophisticated astronomical alignments of their architecture, the precision of their construction, the evidence that they had knowledge that seemed impossibly advanced for their supposed technological level. I found anthropological accounts of Pueblo peoples, who are the cultural descendants of the Anasazi, accounts describing oral traditions about the ancient ones who learned to walk between worlds, about ceremonies that allowed perception of other realities, about places where the boundaries between dimensions were thin. And I found something else, a classified report from 1957, partially declassified in 2007, documenting a military investigation into anomalous architectural phenomena in the Four Corners region, recommending that certain canyons be designated as restricted areas due to potential interference with dimensional stability and perceptual coherence. The report specifically mentioned Ts'íí'áhí. The recommendation was never formally implemented, but the areas in question somehow ended up being designated as culturally sensitive by tribal authorities, effectively restricting access without having to explain the real reasons. I met with my grandfather 3 weeks after the incident. He was living in a care facility in Chinle by then, his body failing, but his mind still sharp. I told him everything that had happened in the canyon. He listened without interrupting, without showing surprise. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You were always going to see," he said in Navajo. "From the time you were a child, I knew you had the gift, the ability to perceive what others couldn't. That's why I taught you the song so carefully. That's why I warned you about places like Ts'íí'áhí. I knew that eventually you would enter one of those places, and I wanted you to be prepared, to have the tools you would need to navigate what you would find there." He reached out and took my hand, examined my palm, traced the lines there. "The mark is here," he said, pointing to a pattern of lines near my wrist that I'd never noticed before. "It shows that you've crossed a threshold, that you exist partially in both worlds now. There have always been people like you among the Diné, people who serve as bridges between the normal world and the world of the old ones, who can speak to both sides, who help maintain the balance between realities. It's a heavy burden. You'll never be fully comfortable in either world again. The normal world will seem too limited, too simple. The other world will seem too vast, too complex. You'll live in between, watching both, protecting both. But it's important work. The old ones need humans who can perceive them to maintain certain structures that require consciousness from both realities. And humans need advocates who understand that the old ones are not enemies or threats, but ancient partners in maintaining the balance of existence. The mark appeared in visible form about 2 weeks after my talk with my grandfather. I was washing my face one morning and noticed a pattern on the back of my neck. Geometric designs that looked like stylized versions of the amber structures I'd seen in Ts'íí'áhí, arranged in formations that seemed to shift slightly when I tried to focus on them directly. It looked like a tattoo, but I'd never gotten a tattoo, and it definitely hadn't been there the day before. The mark was slightly warm to the touch, maybe 3 degrees warmer than the rest of my skin. And when I concentrated on it, I could see the overlay more clearly, could perceive the amber architecture that existed alongside normal reality, could feel the presence of the old ones, even when they were maintaining structures hundreds of miles away. I've met 11 other people with variations of the mark since then. One is a Hopi elder who maintains knowledge of ancient prophecies. One is an archaeology professor at UNM who studies Anasazi sites. One is a park ranger at Mesa Verde. One is a Zuni medicine woman who performs ceremonies at threshold places. One is a BLM ranger who works in Chaco Canyon. One is an astronomer at Kitt Peak who studies alignments between ancient structures and celestial phenomena. One is a quantum physicist at Los Alamos who studies dimensional theory. One is a Pueblo artist who creates works inspired by visions of multidimensional architecture. One is a Ute tribal historic preservation officer. One is a cultural monitor, like Thomas. One is a DEA agent who works the reservation and who once told me, quietly, that he sees things that don't fit in his official reports. We all have stories. We all have encounters with the old ones, with the beings who built in light and sound and mathematical relationships. We don't talk about it openly. We can't. But we recognize each other. We know the look in each other's eyes, the weight of perceiving more than one reality, the burden of protecting structures, and knowledge that most people don't believe exist. I requested a transfer to a different district 9 months ago. The request was denied by the chief of police without explanation. My shift commander, a man who's worked tribal law enforcement for 30 years, called me into his office after I received the denial. Some officers patrol because they know the roads and the people, he said. Others stay in specific areas because they have knowledge that area requires. You have that knowledge now. The Chusca region needs someone who understands what exists in places like Ts'íí'áhí, who can respond to calls in those areas with proper protocols, who can make sure that when people report seeing things that don't fit normal explanations, someone with authority takes them seriously. That's you now. The chief knows it. The council knows it. Anyone who's lived on the reservation long enough knows that there are officers who see more than others, who carry responsibilities beyond normal law enforcement. Your transfer was denied because you're needed exactly where you are. I think there's a network. I think throughout the Navajo Nation and the other Pueblo territories, throughout the entire Four Corners region, there are people in positions of authority and knowledge who understand what the Anasazi really were, where they really went, what they left behind. And those people work quietly to protect the structures, to maintain the protocols, to make sure that the bridges between realities remain stable. I'm recording this because my grandfather told me, near the end of his life, that knowledge held too tightly becomes distorted, becomes lost, but knowledge shared properly helps prepare those who will need it. This is me sharing properly. This is me telling you that there are structures in the canyons and ruins of the Four Corners region that exist in more than 3 dimensions. There are beings that the Anasazi became, that they transcended into, when they learned to build in light and mathematics instead of in stone. There are places where those structures and those beings intersect with our reality, places where the boundaries between dimensions are thin. If you come to the Navajo Nation, if you hike in remote canyons, if you explore ruins and archaeological sites, respect them. Follow the signs that say certain areas are closed. Listen to traditional people when they tell you about places that require proper protocols. Don't enter canyons like Ts'íí'áhí without preparation, without knowledge, without someone who understands what you might encounter. The structures are real. The old ones are real. The consequences of interacting with them without proper preparation can fragment your consciousness across multiple realities, leaving you unable to fully exist in any single one. If you see amber light in a canyon where there should be no light source, if you hear singing in languages you don't recognize, if you perceive geometric structures that seem to exist in more than 3 dimensions, don't investigate, don't approach. Back away slowly and leave the area. And if you must enter, if your duty or your research or your curiosity compels you, learn the songs first. Learn the protocols. Find someone like Thomas or my grandfather who can teach you how to navigate multidimensional reality without losing yourself. The old ones aren't malevolent. They're not demons or threats, but they exist at a level of reality that human consciousness isn't naturally equipped to handle. And interacting with them requires preparation and protection and respect. I'll be out there tonight. I'll be out there every night for the foreseeable future. I'll be patrolling the roads that lead to places like Ts'íí'áhí. I'll be responding to calls in areas where the boundaries are thin. I'll be making sure people understand that what they're seeing is real, that they're not crazy, that there are procedures and protocols for dealing with perceptions that violate normal reality. I'll be maintaining the bridge between worlds, using the songs my grandfather taught me, honoring the agreements that my ancestors made with the old ones centuries ago. That's my duty now. That's the price I pay for saying yes in that canyon, for accepting the mark, for becoming one of those who sees. The structures are always present. The old ones are always maintaining them. And now I can perceive them, protect them, serve as an advocate between their reality and ours. The canyons remember everyone who enters them. The old ones know everyone who perceives their works. And somewhere in the amber architecture that overlays the physical world, beings who were once human continue their eternal work of building in light and mathematics, maintaining the infrastructure that allows multiple realities to coexist, hoping that some of their descendants will remember the old agreements and honor the knowledge they left behind. My name is Officer Daniel Tsosie, Navajo Nation Tribal Police, Bridge Walker, Keeper of Thresholds, Witness to the Old Ones. Welcome to Diné-Bikea, the Navajo Nation. The canyons hold more than stone. The ruins are gateways, not endings. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, in the amber structures that exist alongside our reality, your ancestors who became something more than human are still building, still singing, still waiting for those who can perceive them to help maintain the balance between all the worlds that share this sacred land.